Today on Off the Clock, Sarah and I are going to talk about what's coming around the corner, what types of employment law trends are occurring at the federal level and the state level, and what you should be paying attention to in this new year.
Welcome to Off the Clock, the webcast of employment attorneys at Miller Johnson, where we discuss what is happening in the HR world and provide practical insight and advice.
Let's talk about what we think is happening out there. Right. Again, this is kind of some crystal ball action, but based on some objective information as well.
Okay. Where do you want to start?
Let's start, why not just start with something controversial?
Yeah, let's just dive right in.
Let's just dive right in, DE&I. I think that's especially true given the Supreme Court case that rolled back diversity initiatives in higher education.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And if we talked about that when it happened, and we talked about that it didn't directly apply in the private sector to employment decisions, but that some language used by the justices was interpreted to mean if a case came up that did challenge DE&I initiatives in the private sector, we might see some constriction.
I think
right?
That's right. Yeah, I think that's right. And that I think in the first administration, if I recall correctly, they were leveraging in different areas where they could, including federal contractors.
Yeah.
And including starting to, at the end of the term, publish guidance that essentially said if public contractors are requiring anybody to undergo DEI training, et cetera, they would consider it to be a violation of the contract, et cetera. So that's the type of activity I assume you mean. We're gonna see a pushback. Yes.
At the federal level. That's true. Mm-hmm. I also think, we're not just talking about what's happening federally, right? The states have a lot to say in these areas. And I think we will see some states get more active in perhaps their own laws and regulations, pushing back on some DE&I initiatives. We've certainly seen a lot of that in Florida. So far, I would not be surprised if we saw more state action on DE&I issues in the next few years. Relatedly, not related is actually part of it, when we talk about DE&I, we need to think about religious freedom. So in addition to our most state and federal laws, right, that protect various characteristics and beliefs, religious belief is one of those aspects that's protected. We've seen an increased amount of litigation and funding of what we call kind of nonprofit law firms, right, to take cases to try to kind of shift the balance, I think, in workplaces in favor of employees, right, who are expressing their religious beliefs in various ways and requiring employers to respect that. One of the head-to-head conflicts we've seen, which we talked about in an episode last year, is the conflict in some aspects of DE&I, some mostly related to gender identity and sexual orientation, and the expression of sincerely held religious beliefs.
Right.
I think we may see a shift in that balance in the next few years, or at least a more active attempt to shift that balance. Through litigation, I think we also may see it through federal government and agencies. For instance, the EEOC, right? We think of it, right, as, we don't think of it, it's charged with protecting, right, civil rights and enforcing Title VII in employers. It hasn't been, the EEOC has not been as active in protecting employees' religious beliefs and freedoms.
And accommodations,
we may see more emphasis on that in the future.
That may be a priority agenda item for that new chair of the commission.
I would not be surprised to see the balance or more effort and energy in that area in the coming few years.
Interesting thing for HR folks to start thinking about and understanding rights that are centered around religious freedoms and religious accommodations, because employees also have the ability to request a religious accommodation.
We saw a lot of that in COVID for for our clients where that was not top of mind. I think that a lot of employers were reminded of that during COVID. And we're not going to talk about that again because of the vaccination. But where we're seeing it now is when there's training required, for instance, and the training includes issues related to sexual orientation and gender identity in the workplace, and a person would ask to be exempted or excluded from that training because of a sincerely held religious belief. That's where I think and use of pronouns in the workplace too. That's where I think we're going to see the conflicts come, and perhaps some shifting in the law there. Okay,
interesting.
That's what I have on that.
One thing that I took note of during the campaign in 2024 was some promises about not taxing. I know you're on top of this, not taxing overtime wages, not taxing tips, things like that. What's your thought about it? Is this something employers need to be thinking about? Who knows? Is that just a campaign promise, or is that something that you see the IRS actually changing the Internal Revenue Code to deliver that?
I'm not picking on the candidates in the 2024 election, I promise. When I say during campaigns, local, state, or federal, lots of promises are made. Not all kept, either because it wasn't sincere or frankly because they face headwinds, right? You can't, it's hard for presidents just to snap their fingers and do things, right? You sometimes need congressional cooperation, administrative cooperation, et cetera. So I don't know what will happen, but let me just remind everyone at least what the promise was. The promise was to make tipped, we can call them tipped wages, but tips essentially, non-taxed. Is non-taxed a
so
word?
We can stop worrying about them being under the table. They're just not going to be taxed by law anyway.
So when your server asks you to tip him in cash instead of your credit card, and you think, so you don't have to pay tax, you no longer have to worry
You don't have
about
to claim it on your
Doesn't matter anymore. Obviously, very helpful for people that are earning tips, right? That earn a significant amount of their income through tips. But then this got far less attention. The President-elect Trump also said he would like overtime wages.
Right,
to be taxed. I think tax-free is a more technical term, perhaps. So if that promise is kept, overtime wages will not be subject to income tax. Now, I did not see it broken down as to whether they would still be subject to some kind of payroll taxes, but not income tax. What does that mean? If that happens, that would be a major change, obviously, in workplaces, because my prediction is employees will want to be non-exempt, right? And want overtime even more than they did before.
That's a good point.
The value of overtime will now be even more than 1.5, right? It will be whatever their income tax bracket is, et cetera. It'll be extremely valuable. And Sarah, if that happens, I would like to be non-exempt here at Miller Johnson, and I will work for tips, as well as ask for lots of overtime. I may have a preset tip amount that I ask for, but you can tell that will change the dynamics.
Got it. And just a reminder for our listeners on this. So number one, that change requires, I believe, a change to the law, the Internal Revenue Code.
Correct.
To change a law, we've been talking about civics a lot, but to change a law, that has to go through the
we can't just snap the new administration cannot snap their fingers.
I don't think they can make that change through a guidance or even regulations. I think that has to be a change to the actual Internal Revenue Code. It's been since law school that I read the Internal Revenue Code, so apologies if I'm wrong about that. But the second thing that I think is important to understand is we pay both state and federal taxes.
Right.
And so there could be a change to one, but not the other. And it could be if on a federal level this promise doesn't get delivered, it is an idea that some states may think is a really cool idea and they want to deliver.
Yes.
So it's been put out there now and people did hear it. And so that is something that we may hear more conversation about. We may see states changing their laws to provide to make that change, like California or New York.
I was about to say, just state the obvious. To state the obvious, that's where we may see it first. Also, to state the obvious, man, is this going to get complicated for payroll?
Yeah.
if things like this start happening.
Right. Okay, let's talk about, what are your thoughts on immigration? That's a really
immigration
hot
was
issue right
a
now.
very hot topic during the campaign. Maybe one of the hottest topics during the campaign. So we have another episode devoted specifically to immigration
With the experts.
issues. With actual immigration lawyers. Did you know such a thing exists? We do.
Yes, we
other
do.
people know that?
We've got a whole practice group.
And to state the obvious, we are not immigration lawyers.
No.
All right, so we're going to talk about trends. We expect folks to see things HR department should be thinking about based on the tea leaves. But to really get into the weeds on this, and more specifically, how to take advantage of our immigration laws, we're going to have a special episode on that, and it's going to be fantastic. I'm really excited about it. Here's what I want to say to folks today. Based on what I heard during the campaign and what happened in Trump's first administration, I think we should expect some constriction of immigration, business-related immigration. Okay, so that's bucket number one. So for employers that rely on business visas,
The
right?
H-1B is the
H-1B is the most common one. We should, Trump has said over and over and over again that they should not be given out as freely. So we may see a rise in the minimum salary, for instance, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Now, what's fascinating about that is that is not consistent with the business community's opinion, much of the business community's opinion, and Musk are adamantly opposed to rolling back H-1B visas.
They
Industry
see
in
the need
particular
for the highly skilled
relies
workers
very heavily on
and highly
H-1B
skilled
visas.
foreign workers.
Yes, and they said they will take that one to the mat.
I'm glad you said that, because I would have just assumed as a matter of course that employers who rely heavily on H-1B visas just need to have a different plan, right?
Yeah.
And what you're saying is not so fast.
Not so fast, right?
Not so fast. This could play out much differently than you might otherwise assume.
There is, again, without getting too much into politics, although I love politics, people that know me know that, the Republican Party is not aligned on a lot of key issues like
Right.
this.
They have different opinions.
And that, yes, it's a big umbrella.
Right.
It really is. And so you have leaders at the very top who disagree with each other on fundamental issues like this.
Yes, interesting.
So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, okay.
But that is one issue I think that the business community should be generally aware of.
Okay.
The other issue is deportations. So this was a huge issue during the election. Everyone knows this was talked about quite a bit. The amount of undocumented immigrants in this country, specifically, let's break this down two ways. People who are not authorized to work in the United States who are. So for employers who have employees who are not documented to work in this country, or work with independent contractors who may have people in their facilities, cleaning services, et cetera, is where we see this a lot, right? Should start paying attention to that
To
very
what's going
closely.
on,
That would
right.
be my recommendation.
Okay. There are requirements, of course. Our listeners probably are very aware of them. When you hire an employee, there are I-9 verification requirements that have to be done.
Yep.
Right? And lots of businesses have followed those I-9 requirements, but also have undocumented workers who don't actually have authority to work in this country because they've given a fake social security, something like that.
Correct.
Right? Those are the businesses that I think are going to be heavily, heavily impacted by this. And many of them rely heavily on workers who are from other countries.
Yes.
And are going to have to be talking to their lawyers about what type of risk they might have. There are limits on what you can even ask your current employees if they've provided you with the documentation that's required, right? These businesses can't just up one day decide to fire all of their Spanish-speaking employees, for example.
No.
If they
Right? Please don't do
out
that.
of fear for this increased risk that they're going to be raided by the federal government. This is a very difficult position to be in for a lot of businesses that rely heavily on workers who are from other countries.
Yep.
And it's a tough place to be in. And I guess we can't, we're not going to get into it here, but that is a place in which it's appropriate to seek legal counsel and understand what the risk is and understand exactly what your options are, what you can be doing about it, what you should be doing about it, etc.
And I do want to say something else. In the first episode in the series, we talked about how slow agency action can be.
Yeah.
Right? So take a deep breath.
Right.
Things happening overnight. This is an area where things can happen much quicker.
Yeah.
Right? Because this is an enforcement priority.
Right.
And when we more civics, right? The chief executive officer of the country, the president, really, when we talk about separation of powers, is the law enforcement, right? Well, they enforce the laws of the land, and they get to decide enforcement priorities, right? So if this is an enforcement priority, which it can be,
Right.
on day one, right, we can see action fairly quickly in this area. The other thing we heard a lot about during the campaign is deportations, right? So people who are not authorized to be in this country being removed from this country. There are, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, there are way more people in this country who fit into that definition than can be deported. So the administration has talked about focusing on certain individuals, particularly those with criminal backgrounds, and even now really on the first day of Congress, right? Congress already passed a law making it easier, at least the House did, making it easier to deport individuals with criminal histories, right? So why do employers need to care about that? It may impact some of their own employees, but even on a larger scale, when one member of a family is deported, some families go together.
Well,
So it might not be one of your employees. So if you're sitting back thinking, oh, my employees haven't, none of my employees have a criminal record. We do background checks, we know, blah, blah, blah. However, if someone's son, brother, uncle, aunt, grandmother, whatever, is subject to a deportation order, the entire family may go. So we may see, employers may see employees leaving.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just something
Sort of ties back to my point I just made.
something to
which
be
is
aware of.
businesses who rely heavily on a workforce, either directly hired by them or through a staffing agency that is not, are from countries other than the United States. May just
There'll be an impact.
smaller and larger degrees are going to be significantly impacted.
Those employers will see an impact in the next 4 years, I believe. How great or how small remains to be seen.
And it depends on the business, yeah.
Sure. Okay, what else do we see maybe happening in the next year or two? Pay transparency continues to be a conversation, right? At the federal and state.
State in particular, lots of things happening on a state
Yes,
level.
and particularly with the new administration coming in, we expect most of the activity in pay transparency to be happening at the state level. So pay attention to what states, not just your employees reside in, but where you are recruiting from. Spoiler alert, most of you recruit from all 50.
Yes.
Because when you put something on LinkedIn or Indeed, right, you can't control where someone's sitting when they click that.
That's exactly
arrow.
right. And the pay transparency piece has different aspects to it. Some of it relate to requirements that you have to post the pay range when you post a position. There are limits on asking a current or an applicant or a candidate what their current pay is. There are some state laws who take it further, etc. So that's what you're talking about, being not hiding the 8 ball with regard to what a position, the pay range for a position, and also paying somebody based on their qualifications and what your pay range is rather than what they're making somewhere else.
So that's another aspect of pay transparency. There are some states where you cannot ask.
Yeah.
An
That's what I'm
applicant,
saying.
Yeah, which is different than posting, right?
Yeah.
But then when you're in the interview, you can ask what they currently make or what their pay history
Correct.
is in some situations.
Correct.
Right, in some states.
Yes.
So another plug for state by state work.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
Very, very state specific. I personally don't expect a lot of movement on that at the federal level with this new administration. There were some efforts the last 4 years, but I don't see that happening.
So continue to watch state by state on
Yeah.
that one. Okay.
Yeah, that would be my prediction there.
What else should our listeners be thinking about?
Marijuana.
That's what I was gonna say.
Cannabis or marijuana, the word you use indicates which side
Right.
of that you're on. Probably. So the overreaching message on this is everyone needs to chill.
How on point.
Yeah, just that's what the states are telling you. Okay,
Yeah.
that's what the states are telling employers. Chill. Now let's get into the specifics of what that means. On a federal level, the last 4 years, we've seen some movement to legalize, I'll say cannabis, right,
Yeah.
under federal law, because, quick reminder, no matter what the state rules are, it remains unlawful under federal law. Now, to be fair, it has not been an enforcement priority, right,
For a long
federal
time.
law enforcement
Yeah.
officers, but it is still unlawful. And so it does matter for federal contractors, for there are certain industries, transportation, others,
Yeah.
where that really
Well,
does
it matters
matter.
for all employers because I know a lot of employers who have taken the position that even though a state may have legalized marijuana, they still prohibit it because it's
Yeah.
unlawful under federal law, and that's sort of what they grab onto to explain why they're taking that position.
So we have seen two efforts at the federal level. One is to make it just not unlawful at all, not a prohibited
Right.
substance, regulated substance at all, controlled substance. Another is to lower the level of controlled substance it is. So
Yeah.
it's regulated and controlled, but not the same as some others that we see. So I do not know what will happen with this administration when it comes to that.
Yeah, there hasn't been much talk of it. There certainly wasn't during the campaign. It didn't seem to be a priority item.
Not a hot topic. There was momentum the last 4 years. We'll see if that continues. It might. I would not be surprised either way.
Okay.
I would not be surprised. It does create, for those in the cannabis industry, they know, it does create a lot of confusion and complications.
Yeah.
When the feds say something is unlawful and the states all say, please use it. It's, creates some confusion that the feds could clear up, right? By loosening by loosening its own laws up. Okay. But this is mostly a state by state issue.
Yes.
Okay. And so let's just talk about trends, because often the way things happen is we see, back to civics again. I love it. States as like labs and incubators of ideas, right? Trying things out, and then the things that work well in one state, then other states adopt, and then eventually, right, trickle up to the federal government. That's kind of the way our country was organized.
Are you calling California a lab? I think you just called California a lab.
California has a lot of
I
labs.
like that.
Cannabis labs in particular.
They do try a lot of things out. They
do. God bless them.
Yeah.
But that is really how the country is set up to work. And so, cannabis laws and marijuana laws is the perfect example of that, right?
Yep.
We saw it start in a few places, and now, over 50% of the country
It's kind of
has
like
some form of legal marijuana.
It's kind of like how Starbucks took over our country, right? Started on the West Coast. There were a few stores, took hold, made it to the East Coast, and before you knew it, it was all over Kalamazoo, Michigan.
And thank goodness for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Big fan. We should do a whole episode on that, and maybe their employment practices. Actually, that would be really fun.
That actually would be
I'm not sure if it'll make it into the final episode, into this final episode, but I would love that. So, what are we seeing state by state with marijuana? We're seeing restrictions on employers on testing.
Yes.
We're seeing restrictions on when you can fire
Yes.
someone, even if there isn't a restriction on the testing itself. if you do get a positive test, because you're allowed to, what can you do
That's exactly right.
with that
And
information?
specifically, state law saying a positive test is not enough.
There
You
has
have to be able to
impaired.
prove somehow that they were under the influence.
Right.
And that is a very difficult thing to do.
Yes, testing continues to lag behind what employers really need, which is testing cannot show impairment. Correct. So it remains to be an obstacle and a point of confusion for employers. But the trend is for states to tell employers to chill out. It's legal most places now. Your employees are going to be using it when they're not at work, right? And a positive test can mean they were using it when they're not at work. So let's loosen up a little bit. Right?
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying. I just think it's so hard for employers then when they think somebody is impaired at work, and they're it's going to take a lot of heavy lifting to have processes and protocols in place to then to be able to establish that there's minimally a substantiated reason to believe somebody is impaired while they're at work.
We've talked about this several times in the past, but it bears repeating. This is an area where training of HR and supervisors is really important.
Yeah.
What does impairment look like? What are the objective factors? I mentioned this a long time
And how
ago
you
in an
gonna prove it?
episode, but there is some technology I learned about from a client where it's a speed test essentially on a cell phone, because impairment can slow down reaction time.
Yeah.
So everyone takes a baseline when hopefully they're not impaired, right? And then when there's a suspicion of impairment, they take it again. And if there's a slower response time, that can then help prove impairment.
There's all sorts of
we don't
things
have
out
to talk
there.
about bloodshot eyes, right? And
Well, there's
and things like
there's
that.
a lot of things testing pupil reaction. Yes, there's all of that.
There is some
being
science.
tested.
There is some science and technology tools that can be used other than a urine test or something like that, right? Okay.
So that'll continue to be a challenge.
Yes,
I
expect it
think
to be.
probably if I'm, as you like to say, crystal balling, or I think employers are going to increasingly discontinue testing after workplace accidents unless they really think unless there's a separate reason to think the person was impaired.
Right.
And therefore the accident was the cause of being impaired. Those automatic, you got an injury or there was an accident at work and I'm going to test you, I think those are going to slowly go away.
Caveat on that, check with your workers' comp carrier first.
Yeah.
That's not a decision an employer should make independent of their workers' comp carrier, because there may be requirements from the carrier on that. But I agree with you in principle.
Oh my gosh.
All right, I want to move on
okay.
to New Year's resolutions.
Got it.
Can we do that?
Yes.
Okay.
If I can go first, because I'm afraid you're going to take mine. Because I thought of one.
Okay.
You probably know what it is.
What if you're in HR, if you're a director of HR for a company, what should one of your professional New Year's resolutions be? Sarah?
If I'm a director of HR, my New Year's resolution should be having some way to be knowledgeable about what's happening in the laws of states outside of Michigan.
Oh, that's good. That was not one of mine.
And particularly,
That's good.
if you have employees working outside of Michigan, then obviously specific to those laws.
Yeah.
But also it would be very helpful to you to be able to read the landscape, okay? We are likely to now have a federal administration that is more deregulatory.
Yeah, for sure.
And you and I know that when that happens, we see an increase in state regulation, right? It's sort of, there's like this
Someone's going to
push-pull.
tell you what to do.
That's exactly right.
When Dad
Somebody
gets
is going
worn
to tell
down,
you
Mom.
what to do.
Stop
Yeah.
it.
Dad's going to be quiet for a little bit, and now Mom is going to step up,
Yeah.
and there's going to be an increase. So it is going to be very helpful to have a good understanding of what's happening in states outside of Michigan, and in particular, if you have employees working in those states. I'm just going to make a pitch. Miller Johnson does have this thing called the National Employment Law Center, cost-efficient way. It's a subscription service, and every 2 weeks, it sends an email with all of with updates important updates that it covers all 50 states, but rarely are there important updates in all 50 states, right? So it lists all the important updates. I look forward to receiving it, actually, and I find it very helpful because I see those patterns and I understand what's going on.
Yep.
So
that is excellent. That was not on my list. But I have a lot more, so I've got to pick my
okay,
favorite.
good.
I have a lot more
had,
than two.
You've had more time to think about this, so you go.
Okay, I'll do a more general one and then drill down on a specific area. Okay, my more general one is look at your work from home or remote work, I should say, your remote work policies and practices. This isn't like one of those take out your policy and send it to me to revise and I send it back to revise. I mean, sit down with the leaders of your organizations and the front level supervisors, etc., and talk about how is it going. We now have workers, a lot of employers, not all, but a lot of employers, either as a matter of policy or one-off decisions, have people working in various different locations, sometimes from home, sometimes from different facilities, whatever it is. How is it going? What is working well? What is working not well? And aside from the obvious, well, we've seen a decrease in productivity or we're not sure if so-and-so is working, those sorts of things, think about, do the people who are not with in-person people, are they getting mentoring? Are they getting training? What are their engagement scores like compared to our...
Is this working? Do we...
How can we make if we're going to continue this, let's be intentional about how we do training and mentoring and engagement and when we will all be together and when it's okay not to be together and what meetings will be in person and what meetings are fine to have over Teams or Zoom and how often should we have an all-together offsite, right, where we, things like that. How are we going to build camaraderie, relationships, etc., and take a deep breath and really think about it. I would urge employers strongly to do that in 2025. Now that frankly most have experimented with a few different things, and we can be more thoughtful and intentional moving forward.
I've got one more and then I'll let you finish up. If you are a business that is heavily reliant on individuals for whom you might be concerned about deportation, work with an immigration lawyer to do an internal I-9 audit.
That was one of mine.
And make sure minimally your ducks are in a row. So that if you are subject to an unexpected visit from the federal government, you at least know your house is in order.
Perfect. Okay. That was one of mine, so that's great. But I'll dovetail into a similar message. It also has the word audit in it.
Yeah.
A Fair Labor Standards Act audit. It's a lot easier for us and our team to take a look at your pay practices at the front end than have to pay up at the back end. We have seen an increase in the Department of Labor, Fair Labor Standards Act audits, and an increase in litigation.
I was going to say, plaintiffs' attorneys.
I do expect that to continue under the new administration because, again, the Department of Labor, no assumptions anymore that because a Republican administration coming in that's going to roll back, this is going to be a very employee and labor-friendly administration. At least the Department of Labor will be. So like we have a national employment group, we also have a wage and hour group. And the key things to hit on are exemption statuses and then timekeeping and pay practices. Those are the two buckets. You can do both. You can do one or the other. But I would suggest making an investment in that this year. Okay. We just promised I know we could both think of more things.
Yeah,
but those four things enough.
That's
for
enough.
Most people.
All right.
Okay, this was so fun.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Sarah.